I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding. Not officially, at least. I found out about it from a local magazine, a glossy 2-page spread celebrating the union of wealth and legacy, complete with staged photographs, cursive headlines, and the name of my daughter printed beside her fiancé's like a product label. No mention of me. Not even a footnote. Just the smiling faces of her new family, a row of people in tuxedos and designer dresses, all standing proudly beneath chandeliers I couldn't pronounce. And my daughter in the center, wearing the kind of expression I hadn't seen on her since she was 10, wide-eyed, rehearsed, barely herself. I read the article 3 times. Then I folded the page, slid it back into the magazine, and placed it quietly on my coffee table. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just stared at the wall until the sun shifted enough to cast a new shadow on the floor. That's when I realized. I hadn't lost my daughter. I'd been quietly erased. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Rachel couldn't fall asleep without hearing my voice. Every night, I'd sit on the edge of her bed, reading stories from a paperback too worn to hold its spine. Fairy tales, sometimes. More often, just stories from my own life, dressed up with dragons and glowing stones. She called them Dad's Magic Minutes. And back then, I believed they'd be enough to last a lifetime. I raised her alone. Her mother left when Rachel was barely old enough to say the word banana without adding an extra syllable. She left a note on the kitchen counter and a suitcase full of unmet expectations. But I didn't crumble. I worked. I cooked. I braided hair with fingers meant for power tools. And Rachel? She grew. She grew into a woman who could spot a lie before it formed, who stood up for the kid getting picked on in the hallway, who brought home library books like trophies and defended her science fair results like they were national security secrets. I didn't raise her with money. I raised her with attention. With time. With the kind of love that shows up in packed lunches, handwritten notes, and beat-up sedans idling outside school functions. So when she started dating Nicholas Hale, I didn't worry, not at first. He was polished. Polite. Wore a watch that probably cost more than my car. His smile was all teeth and calculation. The kind of man who made compliments sound like job interviews. He shook my hand the first time we met and looked around our home like he was mentally drawing up blueprints for a remodel. I made steak. He didn't eat red meat. I offered wine. He brought his own. He called me Mr. Easton, even after I told him twice to just call me Dan. Rachel seemed happy, though. She laughed at his jokes. She told me he was ambitious and serious about his future. And when she said the word serious, something in her tone tightened, like she wanted me to know this wasn't a phase. He was going places. I just didn't know she'd be leaving me to follow. The shift came fast. She stopped calling as often. Said she was swamped and buried in work. When we did talk, she'd ask about my blood pressure and whether I was remembering to take my meds, like I was the one whose life needed watching. Then came the real blow, her engagement. She told me over text. 3 lines. No punctuation. Nick proposed. I said yes. It's going to be a small private event with his family. I remember reading it at the gas station, standing next to pump 5 as the wind kicked dust into my eyes. I thought it was a mistake. That I'd misread. That there would be a follow-up text with a date, a smiley face, maybe a joke about how she couldn't wait for me to walk her down the aisle. That message never came. When I finally called, she didn't answer. When I tried again, Nicholas did. Dan, he said, cool and clipped. We think it's best to keep the wedding curated. Rachel's under a lot of pressure. We don't want her distracted. Distracted. That's what I was now. A distraction. Not a father. Not a foundation. Just noise. I remember hanging up without saying anything. just placing the phone down on the counter, like it might explode if I held it too long. The day of the wedding, I went fishing. Didn't catch a thing. Didn't try to. I just sat on the dock, the line slack in the water, and let the ache settle in my chest like wet cement. I told no one. Not even Janice, the neighbor who used to babysit Rachel and still brought over banana bread every Thursday. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted silence. Silence felt honest. But silence has a way of stretching itself, of turning days into echoes. And for a long while, that's all I had. Until one afternoon, nearly 2 years later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Rachel. Not the voice I remembered. Tired. Shaky. Unscripted. "Dad," she whispered, "can I come home?" I hadn't heard that voice in nearly 2 years. When I answered, there was silence at first. A kind of shallow breathing on the line, like someone trying to hold back either a scream or a sob. Then, "Dad?" I froze. There's something cruel about how the heart responds to a voice it hasn't heard in so long. It doesn't remember the pain. It doesn't care about what was said or what was taken. It just leaps. Like a dog that hasn't been fed in days. "Rachel," I said slowly, cautious of my own emotions. I didn't know who else to call. Her words came out cracked. Like she'd rehearsed a dozen other lines, but none of them had survived the fall. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "No." And that was it. No preamble. No excuses. Just one word. Heavy. Final. I gave her the address, though it hadn't changed. And an hour later, she pulled into my driveway in a car that didn't match her old life, a used sedan with one hubcap missing and a passenger door held shut by duct tape. When she stepped out, I didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was shorter. Her clothes were simple, wrinkled, like she hadn't packed, just grabbed whatever fit in a single suitcase. But it wasn't her appearance that struck me. It was her posture. Rachel had always walked like someone on a tightrope, balanced and confident, the world below her but never within reach. Now, she looked like she'd fallen and hadn't yet gotten the wind back in her lungs. "Hi," she said, eyes red. I opened the door. She didn't hug me right away. She didn't even look around the house. She went straight to the old couch, the one she used to fall asleep on during movie nights, and curled up without a word. I stood in the hallway, unsure of what role I was supposed to play. Father? Counselor? Stranger with shared blood? She broke the silence first. "It's over," she said. "What is?" "Everything." The words spilled like marbles across the floor. Clumsy. Loud. Impossible to gather back. Nicholas had left her. Not in some dramatic, Hollywood kind of way. He didn't cheat. He didn't scream. He just, disconnected. Stopped answering calls. Stopped coming home. Then one day, his lawyer arrived, crisp, efficient, with a stack of paperwork and a tone that implied Rachel should have seen it coming. "I signed them," she said. Because he looked at me like a burden. Like something he had to quietly erase. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask her why she didn't see the signs. She already knew. She'd been living with the ghost of her own choices. She stayed with me that night. Slept 12 hours straight, curled up like she did as a child when thunderstorms used to frighten her. The next morning, she made coffee like nothing had happened, using the same mug she'd painted at age 8, the one that still had the words, "Best Dad Ever," on it, though half the letters had chipped away. She didn't bring up the wedding. Or the silence. Or the way she'd left. But it was there, between every glance and every too long pause. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. For a moment, I wanted to reach out. To tell her it was okay. That the past was water under the bridge. But I didn't. Not because I was angry. Not anymore. But because I'd learned something in her absence. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And love doesn't mean you have to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. You can stay, I said. But things are different now. She looked up. What do you mean? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned off the stove, poured her coffee, and slid the mug across the table. Then I mean you're not here to be rescued, I said. You're here to rebuild. And rebuilding starts with honesty. She swallowed hard. Then I should tell you everything. And she did. For hours, Rachel talked. Not just about Nicholas. But about the moments she'd chosen status over connection. How his family had slowly reshaped her. How she'd stopped calling because they made her feel ashamed of where she came from. How she'd started to believe it. I let them make me feel small, she said. And to survive, I made you even smaller. Those words hung in the air like fog. Dense. Heavy. I don't want to be that person anymore, she said. I nodded. Then let's see who you can become. The first week Rachel stayed with me, the house was quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface, where every clink of a spoon feels too loud. She tried to blend in, like she was a guest in her own childhood. Washed her dishes immediately. Folded the blankets on the couch. Walked softly, as if afraid to take up space. I didn't stop her. Not because I wanted her to feel unwelcome, but because I knew what it felt like to re-enter a room you'd once walked out of without looking back. Some doors don't close quietly. They echo. She slept in her old room, though it had long been turned into a makeshift office. The posters were gone. The fairy lights, packed away in a box somewhere in the attic. But the window still faced east, catching the sunrise the same way it always had. One morning, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the light like it was something she hadn't seen in years. Can I help around the house? She asked. I handed her a list without hesitation. Not to punish. But to include. She mowed the lawn. Trimmed the hedges. Cleaned the gutters. She cooked dinner 3 nights in a row, simple food. The kind we used to eat before she developed a taste for imported spices and plated designs. And every evening, she'd sit across from me, pushing food around her plate, like she was trying to swallow everything she'd never said. On the 4th night, she finally spoke. Do you hate me? I didn't flinch. No, I said. But you're still hurt. I nodded. She bit her lip and looked down. I didn't think it would matter so much, she whispered. The wedding. The silence. I told myself you were strong. That you'd be fine. That's the thing about being strong, I said. People forget you can still bleed. She blinked fast, like she didn't want me to see the tears. I bled too, Dad, she said. I believed her. But I didn't rescue her from the discomfort. Not this time. We were learning how to sit with pain. Together. She started looking for jobs after that. Quietly, on her laptop at the kitchen table. She never asked for money. Never asked for help writing her resume. She wanted to do it alone. But I saw the way her shoulders curled inward every time another rejection email arrived. She wasn't used to starting from zero. Nicholas had introduced her to a world of shortcuts. Connections. Private rooms with handshakes that didn't require explanation. Now, she was just another name on a spreadsheet. One afternoon, she came into the living room holding her phone like it was something radioactive. I applied for a barista job, she said. I looked up from my book. How do you feel about that? She laughed bitterly. Embarrassed. Why? I used to go into coffee shops and not even make eye contact with the people behind the counter. I thought I was better than them. And now? I hope they're kinder to me than I ever was to them. That was the first time I saw a flicker of real growth. Not guilt. Not shame. But humility. A kind of quiet awareness that couldn't be taught, only earned. She got the job 2 days later. It wasn't glamorous. She wore a green apron, stood on her feet for hours, and came home smelling like steamed milk and burnt espresso. But she smiled more. Complained less. And slowly, she stopped flinching at her own reflection. One evening, as we sat on the porch, she said, "It's strange. I thought coming back here would feel like failure. And now?" She looked out over the yard, where the maple tree we planted together stood tall and unchanged. "Now it feels like the first time I've stood still long enough to figure out who I actually am." I didn't answer. Just reached for my glass of iced tea and nodded. Because that's the thing about silence, when it's chosen, not forced, it becomes clarity. She still hadn't asked why I never came to the wedding. And I still hadn't asked why she never invited me. But I knew that question was coming. And when it did, I'd be ready. Because some answers can't be given in anger. They have to be earned, one honest moment at a time. It was a Sunday afternoon when she finally asked me. I was on the back porch, sanding an old wooden bench I'd meant to refinish for years. The same one I used to sit on while Rachel played in the yard, pretending to be a veterinarian for stuffed animals. The breeze was gentle. The sun had that late autumn warmth that doesn't last more than an hour. She stood in the doorway for a while before speaking. "Dad?" Her voice was careful. "Why didn't you come to the wedding?" I paused, the sander still humming softly in my hand. I switched it off and set it down slowly. She stepped out, arms folded like she was bracing for a storm. I know I didn't exactly send you an invite," she continued. "But I always wondered why you didn't show up anyway." I looked at her. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't see the girl who used to hold my hand crossing streets. I saw a woman. Wounded. Stronger now. But still searching for something she didn't know how to name. "I did," I said. She blinked. "You, what?" "I showed up." She sat down across from me, confusion clouding her face. "I parked 2 blocks away," I continued. "Stood across the street from the venue. Watched the guests arrive. Watched you step out of a black car in a white dress that looked like it belonged to someone else." Rachel's breath caught. "You were there?" "I was." "Then why didn't you come in?" I looked at her directly, not with anger, but with a calm that had taken me years to earn. "Because it wasn't my place." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "I wasn't welcome, Rachel. That much was made clear. You told me you wanted a private event, carefully managed. Nicholas told me I was a distraction. You didn't fight that." "I was scared," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "But fear doesn't erase choices. And that day, you chose a version of yourself that didn't include me." She looked down at her hands. "I waited in my car for nearly 2 hours," I said. "Drove home just before the ceremony started. I figured it'd be better that way. That you'd have your perfect day. Untouched." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know you came." "I didn't come for the wedding," I said softly. "I came to say goodbye." The silence between us was heavy. But it wasn't cruel. It was real. The kind of silence where truth sits down beside both people and finally takes off its coat. "I wanted you there," she said. "I just didn't know how to stand up to them." I nodded. "I understand." And I did. But understanding doesn't erase impact. "I won't lie to you," I continued. That day hurt more than I've ever let on. Not because I wasn't wanted, but because I realized how easily I could be removed. Like a name crossed off a guest list. "I was ashamed," she said. Of where I came from. Of being too normal. Too simple. They made me feel like love had to be expensive to be real. And now. Now I'd give anything for the kind that costs nothing. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She just looked at me with a kind of rawness that doesn't need performance. Do you forgive me? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up, walked into the garage, and returned with something wrapped in cloth. I handed it to her. She unwrapped it carefully. It was her old backpack. The one with patches from every state fair we ever visited. Inside was a single photograph, her and me on her 10th birthday, both of us smiling, frosting on our cheeks. She looked at it like it had just stepped out of a dream. I kept this, I said, because that version of you never asked for anything but time. And that version of me never had to question if I was enough. She clutched the photo, her hands trembling. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once, I said. It's a hallway. Long. Sometimes dark. But you're walking it now. That's what matters. She didn't speak. She just leaned over and hugged me. Not a polite hug. Not a sorry I hurt you hug. But the kind of embrace that says, I missed this before I even realized it was gone. And I let her stay there as long as she needed. Because sometimes, dignity isn't in saying I told you so. It's in saying nothing at all, and letting the truth do the rest. It didn't happen all at once. Rachel didn't suddenly become the girl I remembered. There was no grand epiphany, no tearful monologue where she declared her transformation. It happened the way trees grow, slow, silent, and only obvious when you look back and realize how much taller they've become. She kept working at the coffee shop. Waking before dawn, tying her hair back in a simple ponytail, and returning home with sore feet and stories about customers who couldn't spell macchiato. But something about the way she told them changed. She laughed more. Not the practiced kind she used around Nicholas's family, those delicate, camera-ready giggles that belonged in magazine spreads. This was real laughter. Deep. Messy. Sometimes with tears. One evening, she came home and handed me a white paper bag. What's this? I asked. Your favorite, she said. Apple fritter. Day old, but I made the manager promise not to throw it out. I opened it. It was smashed. Slightly cold. It was perfect. We sat on the porch together, splitting it like we used to after grocery runs when money was tight. She watched the street in silence for a long time before she said, I don't remember the last time I felt this calm. That's what happens when no one's grading you, I said. She smiled. The next day, she rearranged the bookshelf in the living room. Not because it needed it, but because she remembered how I used to alphabetize the novels by author and theme. That weekend, she fixed the old swing in the backyard, even though I'd been meaning to get to it for months. I found her out there with a wrench and a bucket of bolts, muttering under her breath like I used to when I worked on the car. You're becoming handy, I said, leaning against the porch post. I figure if I'm rebuilding my life, she replied, I might as well rebuild the swing too. There was a quiet pride in her now, not loud or flashy, but real. The kind of pride that comes from earning your peace instead of purchasing it. And little by little, the walls between us, the ones that had been built from silence, disappointment, and years of pretending we were fine, began to crack. Not collapse. But crack. Enough to let light in. She started reading again. Not self-help books or finance guides, but fiction. Stories with characters who made mistakes and still got second chances. One night, she slid a worn paperback across the table. I think you'd like this one, she said. I opened the cover. It was one of mine. The same book I used to read to her when she was little, before bedtime, when the monsters under the bed were no match for a father's voice. You kept it? I asked. She nodded. It was the only thing I packed before I left. I didn't say anything. Just opened the book and began reading aloud, like I had all those years ago. She didn't fall asleep this time. She listened, really listened, to every word. Not because the story was new, but because she was. Later that week, she got her first raise. 50 cents an hour. She celebrated by cooking dinner, her old spaghetti recipe, the one she'd learned from watching me in the kitchen when she was 7. It was a little salty. The noodles were slightly overcooked. It was the best meal I'd had in years. After we ate, she looked across the table at me. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached across and took her hand. "I think you'd finally recognize yourself in her mirror." She didn't cry. Not then. But she didn't let go of my hand either. That night, I sat alone in the living room, thinking about the years I'd spent wondering if I'd ever get my daughter back. And I realized something. I hadn't. Not exactly. Because the girl I raised was gone. Grown. But the woman she was becoming? She was someone I didn't just love. She was someone I respected. The knock came just before sunset. 3 slow raps against the front door, heavy, deliberate, and too confident to belong to a neighbor. Rachel froze in the kitchen, mid-sentence, holding a dish towel and a half-dried plate. I saw her eyes narrow, her chest rise and fall once, sharply. I opened the door. He was exactly the same. Nicholas Hale. Impeccably dressed, not a hair out of place, holding sunglasses he didn't need, with that polished smile that always looked like it had been tested in a mirror. "Dan," he said, like we were old friends who hadn't played chess in a while. "Can't say I was expecting you," I replied. He glanced past me into the house. His eyes landed on Rachel, who had stepped into the hallway behind me, her arms now folded tight. I was hoping to speak with Rachel. Alone, if possible. His voice still had that expensive echo to it. Like someone who never had to raise it to get what he wanted. Rachel stepped forward. "It's okay, Dad," she said, almost too calm. "Let him in." I stepped aside, but didn't move far. I stayed where I could see both of them. Nicholas walked in like he owned the floor. He looked around, taking in the walls, the worn floorboards, the photos, all the things he'd once judged as quaint. "You've redecorated," he said. Rachel didn't respond. She just led him into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, straight-backed, not leaning into the cushions. I remained standing near the hallway. "I came to apologize," he began. A pause. No reaction from her. He continued. "I didn't handle things well. I've had some time to think. And I miss you." Rachel blinked, once. That was it. "I see," she said. There was a silence so thick, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. "I thought maybe we could talk," he added, "outside this environment." He gestured vaguely at the house, and something in Rachel's jaw tightened. She caught it quickly and looked at her hands. "And what exactly do you think we'd talk about?" she asked softly. "Starting over. I know things ended badly, but—" "They didn't end," she interrupted. "You ended them." His mouth opened, then closed again. "I loved you," she said, the words calm, not trembling. "And you loved the version of me that fit into your world. You didn't want a partner, Nicholas. You wanted a performance." "That's not fair," he said. "It's true," she answered. He leaned forward. "Rachel, things are different now. I've left that firm. I'm doing consulting work. I've been going to therapy." She tilted her head, as if measuring his words. "You're saying all the right things," she said. "But you haven't asked me a single question. You didn't ask if I'm okay. Or how I've been. Or if I'm happy." Silence again. "I've changed," he said quietly. I have too, she replied. And this version of me doesn't need what you're offering. I saw it then, not defiance, not bitterness, but something better, clarity. Nicholas stood up, smoothing his jacket. Well, he said, glancing toward me again, I guess I should let you get back to things. He didn't look at Rachel again as he walked out the door. When it closed behind him, the tension in the room didn't immediately lift. Rachel sat still, her hands in her lap, her shoulders high. Then she let out a long breath. I was scared I'd freeze, she said. That I'd fold just hearing his voice. You didn't, I said. She looked up at me, eyes glistening. I didn't. There was no celebration. No victorious music cue. Just quiet. But in that quiet, I saw something shift in her. Not pride. Not revenge. Power. The kind that comes when you face the thing that once controlled you, and realize you don't have to answer the door ever again. That night, we sat on the porch like we always did. I didn't expect him to come here, she said. Neither did I. She looked down at her hands. I didn't even realize until now. I didn't want to go back. Not even a little. That's growth, I said. No, she replied. That's peace. A week passed after Nicholas showed up at our door. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. Coffee in the morning. Work in the afternoon. Rachel folding laundry while humming tunes from her childhood. Me fixing that old screen door I kept saying I'd get to. But something had shifted in the air, not between us, but around us. The way a calm lake still ripples long after a stone disappears beneath the surface. The fallout didn't come from Nicholas. It came from his mother. It started with a letter. Not an email. Not a voicemail. A real envelope. Cream-colored. Embossed. Addressed in perfect cursive like it had been written by a fountain pen dipped in judgment. Rachel found it tucked into the screen door one afternoon. She stood on the porch holding it like a warning sign. She didn't open it right away. Just walked inside, placed it on the table, and stared at it like it might ignite on its own. Should I read it? She asked me. That's your call. She sat down. Took a breath. Then opened it. The letter was 2 pages. Neat. Cold. Weaponized politeness. It didn't beg. It didn't scream. It simply stated how disappointed they were. How distressed they'd been to hear about Rachel's unfortunate decline. How they still believed she could correct her path if she made the right choices. And finally, one line that hung in the air like a bad smell. A woman of your background should be grateful for the opportunity you were given. Rachel read it silently. Then again. Then folded it once and set it aside like you would a grocery list you didn't intend to follow. You okay? I asked. She nodded. Slowly. I thought I'd be angry, she said. But I'm just tired. Tired of chasing approval from people who'd never opened their arms, only their doors wide enough to let me in and then lock them behind me. She stood, walked to the kitchen, pulled out the junk drawer, and dropped the letter inside without ceremony. Then she looked at me. Do you know what they called me behind my back? She asked. I shook my head. Dan's daughter. Like it was a punchline. Like loving you made me less than. I clenched my jaw, but said nothing. I used to try so hard to make them forget, she continued. I'd change the subject when they asked about you. Laugh when they made jokes about working-class families. I became fluent in shame. And now? She smiled, not wide, not dramatic, but real. Now I'm proud of where I come from. Even if it took losing everything to see it. That night, she printed out a new resume. Not for a promotion. Not for a new coffee shop. For community college. She wanted to study early childhood education. Said she missed being around real people. Said she wanted to teach kids that success isn't something you wear, it's something you build. She filled out the application on my old laptop. Asked for my help proofreading. Your grammar's better than mine, I told her. She grinned. Learn from the best. The next morning, she mailed it in herself. Didn't wait for my permission. Didn't second guess. She walked to the mailbox like she was walking toward her future, not running from her past. Later that week, while I was sweeping the porch, I noticed something written in the dirt on the back window of her car. 4 words, scrawled by a finger. You'll regret this, traitor. Nicholas's style. No. Too emotional. But someone from that world, clearly. I waited for her to see it. Watched her pause, read it, then grab a towel from the trunk and wipe it clean. She didn't ask who did it. She didn't talk about it. She just went inside, made a cup of coffee, and went back to filling out her FAFSA form. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't payback. It's progress. The day her acceptance letter arrived, it was raining. Not a storm. Just that gentle kind of summer rain that taps the windows and smells like something new starting. She stood on the porch with the envelope in both hands, blinking at the return address like it was too fragile to believe. I watched her from the kitchen window. She didn't scream. Didn't jump. She just smiled, that slow kind of smile that spreads from the chest before it reaches the face. She came inside, quietly handed me the letter, and said, I think I'm ready. She started classes that fall. 3 nights a week, she took the old Buick and drove herself to campus. Came back with notebooks full of scribbled thoughts, coffee stains, and a tiredness that had nothing to do with regret. I like who I am when I'm learning, she told me once, flipping through pages. Feels like I'm building something with my own hands. I saw it in her posture. In the way she spoke to cashiers. In the way she stopped apologizing for existing. Rachel didn't just recover. She redefined. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the maple leaves curl gold with the season, she turned to me. I don't know how I'll ever repay you, she said. You already have. She tilted her head. You didn't give up, I continued. You came back. You did the work. That's not a gift you can return, it's one you carry forward. She reached over and took my hand. I used to think strength meant pretending you weren't hurting, she said. But now I think strength is showing up, even when you're still bleeding. We sat like that for a long time. No words. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees and 2 people breathing in the peace they'd earned. Months passed. She got a part-time job at a local after-school program. Started tutoring 2nd graders in reading. One afternoon, she brought home a crayon drawing from one of her students, a little girl named Maya. It was a stick figure family, a house. A girl. And next to her, someone with a gray ponytail and a big smile. She says I remind her of her grandpa, Rachel said. But also her big sister. She laughed at that, but I saw something in her eyes. A softness. A sense of belonging. She was creating something new now, not just for herself, but for others. On her birthday, she baked her own cake. Chocolate, with too much frosting. Exactly how she liked it. After we ate, she handed me a wrapped box. Small. Square. No card. Inside was a key. I looked up. I signed the lease yesterday, she said. Little apartment near campus. Nothing fancy. But it's mine. My chest tightened, the way it does when you're proud and sad at the same time. You'll visit? I asked. Every Sunday, she said. Dinner's on me. That weekend, we moved her in together. Just the 2 of us. The apartment smelled like paint and possibility. She'd already stacked her books on the windowsill and taped up a calendar with her class schedule. Before I left, she walked me to the door. "I know I messed up," she said. "For a long time, I thought walking away made me independent. But real independence is knowing where you can return without shame." She hugged me then. Not as a daughter needing rescue. Not as a woman apologizing for the past. But as someone who had found herself, and was finally proud of the reflection. "You never closed the door on me," she whispered. "And I'll never forget that." I held her for a moment. Memorized it. Then I stepped back, gave her a nod, and said, "Go build something beautiful." She smiled. I already started. As I walked back to the car, I looked up. The rain had stopped. The clouds were parting. And for the first time in a long time, the sky felt wide open. She didn't just come back. She came home, and then had the courage to leave again, not to escape, but to grow.